Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show debate for the ESUJ Tournament 2015. Excuse me. On the government, speaking for proposition on Prime Minister, we have Ms. Shannon Turner. She has received the Master of Arts from the University of Edinburgh, and she'll be starting at the UK Diplomatic Service. On the Member of Government, we have Mr. Michael Pepper. He's received a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Strathclyde in Politics and Economics. Ms. Shannon Turner will be delivering the reply speech for the propositions. On the opposition, we have Ms. Katie Hurd, speaking as the leader of opposition. She's now studying economics and politics at the University of Durham. On the member of opposition, we have Ms. Becky Hurd. She's studying economics with German at the University of Birmingham. Ms. Katie Hurd will be delivering the reply speech for the opposition. As is tradition with the show debate of the ESUJ tournament, the adjudicators of this debate will be the audience. At the end of the debate, I will ask everybody to raise their hands to show who you think won the debate. So please give a fair decision, and please listen very closely, because you are responsible for one team being very happy and one team being very, very sad. The motion before the House, ladies and gentlemen, is assuming that love is quantifiable. This House would not allow couples who score in the bottom 20 percentile from getting married. And I'd like to call upon the Prime Minister to open the case to stand in her name and say
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having us here today. Now, we on side proposition believe that love is one of the most powerful forces in our lives. It brings great joy, but it also brings great sorrow, particularly when a relationship ends. We think because love has this incredible power over our lives, we think it should be regulated by the government in the way other extremely volatile, dangerous, and powerful forces are. We ultimately believe that every marriage should be founded on a strong basis of love. We think this is the best way for the government to ensure individuals can live happy, fulfilling lives. So on side proposition today, I'll be arguing three things. Firstly, I'll be looking at what we believe marriages are for and what a good marriage involves. Secondly, I'll be talking about why we think love is ultimately the most important criteria in a successful marriage. And finally, I'll be arguing why we think marriage is a privilege and not a right, and therefore a legitimate remit for the government's action. Firstly, however, I just want to set out our mechanism today. So what Michael and I are proposing is that when a couple wants to apply for a marriage license, at this point in time, they must take a test which evaluates the level of love they have for one another. If either or both individuals score within the bottom 20th percentile of this test, they will be denied their marriage license. The top 80% will all automatically receive their license and will never have to reapply or retake their test. However, if you are denied a license at this point, you are welcome to reapply in future years. We think that this is a fairly consistent, reasonable way to make this debate. So on to my first argument about the purpose of marriage. Now, on side proposition, we're hopeless romantics, so we find it deeply regretful that 1 in 3 marriages end in a divorce. We think this is tragic, not only because of the emotional trauma that a divorce causes, no thank you, but we think that ultimately a marriage should be something like a force of constancy in your life. We think a marriage is something you should be able to rely on throughout the years, something that you know you can always fall back on. We think marriages serve a really important role in terms of providing emotional stability as well as financial stability, as well as a common set of morals and values that you live your life by. We think that ultimately a good marriage is about constancy about the reliance on another person that you can always count on. We think ultimately all marriages should begin with the premise that you will stay together for as long as possible. We think that it is bad to enter into a marriage under an infatuation which you don't think will last, because we think ultimately this causes great pain to the individual person. And furthermore, we think this kind of devalues the point of marriage and reduces the social significance and the relevance of marriage if marriage is no longer seen as a constant, lifelong commitment. Therefore, on side proposition, we believe that ultimately the aim of marriage and what governments should encourage in a marriage is a long-term commitment that we believe will last through the ages. We think this is better for society, and we think it's better for people who are embarking on this important decision. So why do we think love is so important in a marriage? For a few reasons. Firstly, we think love implies a certain degree of commonality and compatibility, either in your personality or interests, because there's something about this person that has caused you to fall in love with them. But more importantly, we think that love is such a powerful force in our relationship that it can help two people stick together beyond what other trials and tribulations they may face in their relationship. We think if you get married for purely economic reasons, then if you face economic difficulty, you no longer have a reason to stay together. But if you get married for love, despite all the challenges you may face as a couple, you will always have a motivation to work through them, regardless of bankruptcy, having children, all these difficulties. We think love is the constant factor which makes people want to stay together. We do recognize that people fall out of love or that love changes because people change, but we believe that the memory of once having a strong love for one another is often strong enough for people to still want to work to stay together. We think that even though a love may fade as time goes on, we think a kind of fondness for one another and these shared memories will always prevail. So we think having very strong love for one another at the beginning of a relationship is a very important factor in staying together. Furthermore, we also believe that love entails a certain degree of consideration for another person, because love is a state whereby your happiness is conditional upon the happiness of the person you love. We think that this means you have a deep level of empathy for your partner. We think that this means that you are very likely to always treat your partner well, to always treat your partner with respect, and to always make decisions that are in the best interest of your partner as well as yourself. We think, therefore, that love is an incredibly important part of a good marriage and of a marriage that is likely to last through the years.
Yes. Can you give me reasons why you are in love with your boyfriend?
I think that love, as I mentioned before, I think the fact that your values coincide with those person's values are a very important part of love. I think it's the fact that you can share a vision of your future together is a huge part of love. I think it's the fact that you know someone will support you unconditionally and that you feel the same way about them is like the cornerstone of love. So ultimately, I think like loving someone is about wanting to share every aspect of your life with someone and feeling that you are able to do so and willing to be vulnerable to do so. So we believe that love effectively is the most important ingredient for a successful long-term marriage. So finally, on why we think that marriage should not be seen as a right, but rather a privilege. So firstly, we note on side proposition that a marriage confers several privileges and preferential treatments to married couples by the government. For example, you have tax benefits. For example, you have the unique legal rights to your spouse's assets if something should happen. We think because the government treats married couples preferentially, we think that therefore marriage is a privilege and not a right that everyone can receive. Furthermore, we see that marriage involves taking on rights or specific risks and responsibilities beyond those that you were born with yourself. Because your decision to get married does not just affect you, but affects your partner, it affects people around you, we think it is then right for the government to intervene to make sure that you are competent to take on these responsibilities and to take on these additional risks. We think marriages do not just affect one person, they're not just for one person to decide, we think they affect many of those around them, and because of the complex circumstances and the enormity of the decision to get married, we think it is right for the government to ensure that the person is able to get married and will do that duty justice and fulfill their obligation to the fullest extent. Ultimately, we think the governments are helping individuals make better decisions for themselves, they're helping society function with better, more stable relationships, and we think ultimately that a marriage in the top 80% is what all of us should aspire to, and a bottom 20% love is not good enough for anyone to settle for. So because we're hopeless romantics on side proposition, I'm very proud to propose.
I thank the Prime Minister for her remarks, and I call upon the Leader of Opposition, Katie Hurd, to deliver the Opposition's
instructor speaking self-defense here.
It's interesting, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, that Shannon has clearly never heard of puppy love, or teenagers being in love, or people who genuinely believe they feel affection for one another, who want to spend time with one another. We think those people are likely to score highly on this test. This doesn't mean that they are likely to be there in the future when the puppy love wears off, when that love, that infatuation they felt for each other at the time wears off. We think there are many factors that are important in relationships and are important in the foundation of a stable marriage. But that's not my case. My case today is why the government shouldn't be interfering in my relationship, my marriage, and should allow me to make bad decisions, should allow me to make the decision that even if I end up in a relationship that ends in divorce, as one of three Shannon says, I should be allowed to do that for my own personal experience, and I don't want the government to be part of that. First of all, a few points of rebuttal. Shannon says that for a successful marriage, what you need is commonality. What you need is shared interests. What you need is a shared passion. That is a reason for friendship. That is a reason Shannon and I are friends. That is a reason I am friends and have met many of you here today. I'm sure we would be quite unsuitable to marry one another. At this point, there is a lot more that goes into a relationship than commonality, and even some of the things that she tends to list. But then Shannon says that marriage is a privilege. Marriage is a privilege given the benefits that are given to you by the government. First of all, I'd like to point out to Shannon, and as part of my case, that she is now limiting something to some of the most privileged people in society. Bear in mind, she is now shutting people like widowers who still feel an attachment to their previous husband who might have died or previous wife who might have died, but want the security of a relationship, the security of a marriage to secure their interests going forward. Secondly, she also shuts out people from conservative religious backgrounds, ones who would not be able to meet a partner without an arranged marriage, and who foster love over time. We don't think those people are likely to get the benefits on Shannon's side if they say to us, well, there's now more of an incentive for people to get to know each other before an arranged marriage. We don't think that's likely to happen. If you're from a conservative religious background, you have limited access to those people. At that point, it means that you are unable to enter into a fulfilling life relationship of the type that Shannon thinks is so good for people, is so good for our well-being. So, moving on to my case. Why do we desire marriage as a society? Why do we desire that companionship that is validated by law? First of all, I would like to point out that at times there are four things actually that I think that show that why people desire marriage and why people who might be in the bottom 20% still continue to desire marriage. First of all is safety. The safety that you know that person is legally bound to you, that it makes it harder and makes you go through the tough times. Secondly, the stability that comes from a marriage, from a legally recognised institution. It becomes a lot harder to break up in these circumstances. And thirdly, the idea of a form of showing your commitment to that other person, showing that you want to help them in their future. We think that even if you score in the bottom 20% of this, it means you are still likely to want those values, still value those things within your relationship. The fact you put yourself forward for the test is very likely means you've already considered all these factors, considered that you still believe that person is the one for you. At that point, there are two things that happen. At the point at which you take the test, we are not just deciding that the test shouldn't exist. We're quite happy for the test to exist. We love the idea that we could judge our relationships and decide if they actually love us. But the thing is that the government then enforcing the decisions on that test upon us. We should be able to take the test and decide for ourselves. If we come in the bottom 20%, it is still likely that we might make the decision not to get married because we realise that perhaps we don't love each other enough. But that should not be a decision made by the government, enforced upon us and told, this is the way you have to behave, the government knows best. Why should the government have no right to limit our ability in this choice? Because bear in mind, governments aren't all-encompassing. Relationships and marriages change over time are ones that make you happy and make you sad, as Shannon mentions. But there are many benefits that even a short-term marriage, even if this marriage leads to divorce, that you have made that calculus, that there is a potential that you could end up being divorced, and ultimately you've made that jump and that leap into the unknown. We think people who make that cost-benefit calculation in their head of their relationship have taken this into account and realise that perhaps there are some lifelong benefits to them that they see from getting married. One second. By telling us that we cannot have that, because you might have some inability to love for various people, you might not feel that full-bodied love that the proposition wanted us to have, means that you're restricted from having those benefits. As one, we do not think the state should be making for us. Yes?
So you say the decision to get married is a cost-benefit analysis, but love is literally proven to be an irrational chemical reaction in our brain. How can people rationally decide to get married without the government's help?
So basically you've said that love is irrational, so therefore a test which judges your irrationality, which says you're 100% irrational or you're 20% irrational, and therefore you should decide to be married on that test. I'm sorry, Shannon, you've literally just said that is by basing your marriage on the decision to marry on love is an irrational one. Perhaps we should be choosing some other factors which people take into account. Effectively, what you've just told us is the government is saying if you don't hold for some on a rationality test, you personally have to be bound to that decision. Quite frankly, we think people do make a better calculus of the kind of decisions that are better from them and what they can learn from that experience and what they'd like to be a part of. I'll quickly go on to the other people that we think are hurt by this motion, because bear in mind there are just some people out there who need the safety and security of a marriage. And yes, they might not necessarily be 100% in love with that person, but the benefits conferred to them by marriage are incredibly important. First of all, we point out people who have been through abuse, been through trauma, been through issues in their life that makes them have less capacity or less percentage of their ability to love and trust another individual. They might want to get married to increase that. They might develop love over time for that person. And the reason they want to get married is to increase that trust, increase that relationship. We think by saying they cannot get married, it reinforces their ideas that they shouldn't trust someone, that they shouldn't be in this relationship, and stops them from getting all the happy, fuzzy feelings that props say you get from a marriage and get from love. We think at the end of this debate, well, soon, we think that this comes down to governments restricting our choices based on an arbitrary, as the government says, irrational feeling. For these reasons, we beg you to oppose.
I thank the Leader of Opposition for her remarks, and I call upon the Member of Government, Mr. Michael McNally, to deliver the second constructive speech in 7 minutes.
Okay, so firstly, Katie misunderstands Shannon's POI. When Shannon stands up and says that love is inherently rational, and so we challenge the idea that marriage is always made an exclusive cost-benefit analysis right now. What we're pointing out is that when you get married, you do make a cost-benefit analysis, and you don't just consider love. You also consider other things, like if I'm planning on having a career in Australia, and my potential love is planning on having a career in Scotland, that is one minus thing in the column, right? Because that's a problem. If she wants kids and I don't, that's another thing. These are the objective things we include in the cost-benefit analysis. We also include our love. What we're saying is that the government needs to sometimes point out that you can't analyse your own love very well because love is, as Shannon says, inherently irrational. So that aspect of the cost-benefit analysis cannot be performed. We're not saying that by being in love you can't be rational about anything at all. We're just saying that you can't accurately assess your own love for someone else, and that the government just cutting you off at the 20% level might be a good idea because people are unwilling to believe that they are in the bottom 20% of love, especially if they've never been in love before, because we may think that this is what all love is. But we are going to argue in our substantive case today that love is not binary. It's not the case that I'm in love or I'm out of love. It's the case that there is a spectrum of love, and that you can be intensely, madly, like butterflies, heart skipping, can't deal without you love, and you can have yeah, I'm very, very fond of you, I am, attracted to you, but this probably isn't soulmate love. Katie further says that like widowers or people who have been through trauma or people who are maybe insecure or lonely or who just want a partner won't score above 20% in this, yet may want a partner. We would argue that that is just not a good circumstance to be getting married in. Like, by all means, if you have gone through trauma or you're a widower, like, be in a relationship if that's what you want. But we think that you should be open and honest with the fact that if you are still in love with someone else, or if you have severe emotional issues, or you don't, like, love yourself because of whatever issues you've been through, you probably aren't ready to make a lifelong commitment to someone if you're not in love with them because you've got so many of your own emotional issues. We would argue that these people should wait until they are over these issues before making such a devastatingly large commitment. We're not stopping people from being in relationships if they score over 20%. But we think that marriage should say, okay, you're in love, your love is like very strong, or at least in the top 80%, and you're ready for a lifelong commitment. Now, thanks. What is our substantive case today? So, basically, I've called this the butterfly extension. Everyone deserves butterflies, right? But we think that people often settle for less than the best love they can achieve. And we're going to go on to tell you why that's bad and why this will stop that. So firstly, the contention we make is that love is not binary. Like, you can have been in love with multiple people throughout your life and say, yeah, I've loved before, and I've never loved someone like I now love my wife. And we think that that's normal, right? The problem with this is that we have to accept there is some love that isn't that good, like bottom 20% of love, where you are technically in love and you have great affection for the person and they mean a lot to you, but both of you could find someone who you love more and who loves you more and who you'll ultimately be happier with, right? These people are less likely to get divorced. They're less likely to have destructive relationships or relationships that are not particularly fulfilling, right? Clearly society has these loves right now because 33% of marriages in the Western world end in divorce, right? That's bad because, people have kids and then kids are raised in broken families. You have, divorce is never a fun process, right? Like, Katie sort of stands up and says people may want to go through that anyway because they make a cost-benefit analysis, but we think we can argue that people don't get married expecting to get divorced, and no one really ever wants to get divorced, right? So, what happens when you prevent the bottom 20% of people getting married? You force people to evaluate their relationship and to think, wow, so if five couples are in a room, 4 couples on average love each other more than me and my partner. I think I'm going to try and find someone else. Someone who I love even more, even if it's difficult. We think that's a really positive signal to send, and something the government should definitely encourage. And despite Katie saying the government shouldn't get involved, we think the government should get involved to make you happier. We think the government does get involved in our lives all the time, right? That's the entire purpose of the government, is to protect us from ourselves and to make our lives better. So, why do people not hold out naturally? Like, why do people settle for not particularly great love? Well, firstly, because they don't always know, but also because there's intense societal pressure to get married, right? Like, from a young age, we are taught, like, oh yeah, when you get married, you'll be so happy, and like, that's the end goal. And like, romantic films end with like the happily ever after of couples getting together. So when you find someone who you love, even if it's not like rip your clothes off, can't wait to see you, stay up all night waiting for a text message love, if you find just any form of love, you're like, cool, this is my happily ever after. I can't let it go or I'll be lonely and sad for the rest of my life. Yes?
So you said there will always be someone that you might love more. Isn't that just an argument for people who score 100% of the test got married, not just those from the 20% threshold upwards?
No, Katie, because it's a bell curve. It's not an objective test. It's not like you love me 15% on some objective scale. We're talking about the bottom 20%. Like, we would say that 20% is a pretty good number because just by the way numbers work, the average person can't love someone more than 51%. Right? So 20% is obviously a good number. So to conclude this case, it's hard to assess your love. And there is intense societal pressure, there's intense familial pressure to grasp any love you can, particularly if you're quite a lonely person, if perhaps you're young, if you've had issues, if you're insecure. That you may, at a young age, want to grab onto someone who loves you and who you know loves you and who you know you love, even if it's not everything you read about in the fairy books. We think the government should incentivise people and encourage people to hold out and wait until you're 30 or 40 or hell 50. My dad found a soulmate when he was 56, but I really bet that he hadn't, this is awkward, I really bet that he had waited until he was 56, because now they are super, super happy, right? We don't think people should settle for less than butterflies. And we think the government should say, look, if you want to get married, if you want to stay together, fine, but we're not going to give you the marriage license until you're in those butterfly territories. For all those reasons, we're very happy to propose.
I thank the Member of Government for his remarks, and I call upon the Member of Opposition, Ms. Becky Howard, to deliver the Member of Opposition speech in 7 minutes.
On side opposition, we think that the role of the government is to facilitate a variety of different lifestyles, and we think it is both unfair and illegitimate for the government to prioritise certain values, i.e. love, over other values such as companionship, shared interests and shared experience, none of which require love, which we can have without love, and we think that that's really harmful. So the harms that we get from Michael are of people settling for some kind of love when they could probably get better in a hypothetical world. But my second point that I'm going to talk to you about today is why this policy makes it a lot harder for people in bad marriages to get out of them, because it creates the idea that you have made it, that you are in a successful marriage that can work. And we think that's harmful for people when they have terrible experiences. Governments say they think it's a shame that 1 in 3 people divorce. We think if you're really unhappy in a marriage, it can provide you with a lot of personal freedom, and we think it's better for you to get out of that marriage and to live a happy life. Couple of points of rebuttal before I enter my substantive. So, government want to say that it's an irrational feeling when you are in love, therefore the individual is incapable of making a decision about it, and that therefore necessitates government intervention. We think that it's unfair for the government to prioritise certain kinds of values over others, and we think when the government directly harms vulnerable groups in society, which it has a responsibility to do so, to look after, we think that's therefore illegitimate. We also have the suggestion from government that individuals such as widows, if they take this test and find they're in the bottom 20th percentile, that's perhaps a wake-up call, that they're not ready yet to make a lifelong commitment. We think it's unfair for the government to force their own metric as to what makes a successful relationship. We think these individuals should be able to make choices for themselves. I'm loving the economics analogies. I think the free markets of relationships should apply, no to government intervention. So let's talk to you now about what we think is unfair from the government. So we think when you do not pass this test, it creates the idea that there are those who made it, those who achieved and who are worthy of marriage, and those who are not. And this test doesn't take into account a lot of other values which we think are really legitimate for people to have. So, especially when you look towards elderly couples, there's this cultural kind of feeling that you look at older couples who are together and think, wow, they look so happy. And often you don't see this kind of fluffy feeling of love, but individuals might have, say, admiration for one another. They enjoy each other's company. Maybe they both enjoy travelling and they like travelling together. Maybe they've had the shared experience of bringing up another human being, i.e. their child. That can be a really meaningful experience, and it doesn't have to involve love. So we think when the government introduces this test, no thank you, we think that puts less emphasis on those values, which we think are totally legitimate. Coming on to my second point now, talking about the harm to people who are in bad marriages, but first of all, let's talk about love a little bit. So Erin Morgenstern said that love is fickle and fleeting, and it is rarely a solid foundation for decisions to be made upon in any game. Poets and writers have been obsessed with love. I tried to Google some Japanese poets that I could quote to try and sound really impressive, but I'm just not sure my pronunciation. But many writers have written about it. Shakespeare, loads of haikus have been written about this. As Katie points out, you also have so love is also incredibly fickle. What we agree that it can be a powerful emotion, but see teenagers who've been going out for 2 weeks and write on each other's bebos and say oh, I love you. That's an example of fleeting love, right? But also when you're married to people for a very long time, what you want in life can change. We think your lives can go in completely different directions, and maybe the shared experiences that you had to begin with and that shared love disappears over time. Or for example, if you get married to somebody and you feel like you no longer are able to fulfill your career aspirations because of your relationship with them, you might grow to resent them. You might grow to have an unpleasant interaction with them. Equally, at the beginning of a relationship, it's very easy to show the good side of yourself, so you take somebody out to dinner, you wine and dine them. See the idea of a honeymoon period within relationship when everything's going great, you're enjoying somebody else's company, but over time, these things can fade, right? And when feelings fade, sometimes people treat their partners with less respect. So Shannon says to us that if you're in love with somebody, you always want to treat your partner with respect, but we think love can fade over time, even if you're above this 20% percentile line. So this applies to both groups of people. So you have people who don't qualify for the test, who just feel as though they're not worthy for marriage, and they're not worthy for this preferential treatment. We think this is wholly unjust, and we think the criteria I gave at the beginning of companionship and happiness and shared interests should be sufficient for people to get married. We think people can make that decision themselves. But secondly, we think when people are currently in a marriage, there's a huge social pressure if they pass this test, no thank you, in order to try and make their relationship work. That can be really, really harmful. We're talking about people whose partners may no longer respect them, may no longer want them to be the best version of themselves. In really extreme cases, we're talking about partners who might be physically abusive to one another, and that's a huge harm on our side of the house. But talking about divorce, it actually can be incredibly liberating for many, many individuals, especially when people get married incredibly young, to realise, actually, I have 20 plus years of my life to go, and I can travel around the world if I want to. I don't need to be constrained to this person that I felt like I loved 40 years ago. I'm sure many of you have had experiences where you felt really strong feelings for somebody and you thought that it was love, but time goes on and you realise that those things have changed. I think that it's a massive benefit for individuals to be able to have more personal freedom and escape those marriages, and that's something that we really welcome. But under this policy, if you qualify to begin with, it's seen as a personal failure on your part that somehow you let the flame die out. We don't think that that's okay, and we think that the government would thereby be not fulfilling its role to facilitate lots of different people wanting to live different lifestyles. People should be able to marry for whatever reason they choose, and we think it's unfair to put pressure on people who are married that they have the right life, that they have the right values, and we think free market forces working in the market of marriage means that if people really are unhappy, they feel more able to escape without people saying, you are the lucky ones, you are able to marry. I'm incredibly proud to oppose.
I thank the Member of Opposition for her remarks, and I call upon the reply speaker of the Opposition's Katie Hurd to visit the Opposition's reply in 4 minutes.
So, on opposition today, we've given you a two-pronged case. One, why government intervention on any case, regardless of the outcome of that marriage, is not warranted and at the time is going to make things worse. Becky told you how it makes, in fact, the pressures that Michael talks about harder. It makes it harder to concede that maybe you made a bad decision in the first place. It makes it more likely that you have to start assigning blame to someone within the relationship for that relationship breakdown, rather than just conceding that it was a bad decision in the first place and perhaps that you made a bad choice some many years ago. A few things I'll be covering in this speech. First of all, why the government should not be involved in our relationships, regardless of whether the divorce is likely to happen, and who else is shut out by their motion. So, Michael tells you that widowers are not ready to get married. Becky gives a response to this, but a secondary response to this is, first of all, Michael is assuming that all marriage has to be based on love. Given we are in an international setting right now, he clearly didn't consider that in some countries, many women often cannot work or are not allowed to work. They often rely on their spouse for the money, for the security, for the environment in which they continue to exist, and when their partner dies, are often left destitute. The government in those scenarios do not provide adequate, in fact there is no government in the world that provides an adequate safety net for those widows to be able to carry on their lives. So they may wish to choose to get remarried in order to establish like financial security and investment for themselves and their children. We think these people are likely to end up in the bottom 20% of this test, but should still be allowed to go ahead and marry in order to secure their future. We also say, secondly on that, is that this unfairly penalises people from religious conservative backgrounds. Notice that a lot of the time, the concept of love and the concept of marriage is not one based on Western or indeed Japanese values of marrying solely because you think that person is the strong, butterfly-feeling person for the rest of your life that Michael mentioned. Sometimes people choose to marry for other reasons, and those marriages are just as strong in those cultures for those reasons and for the companionship reasons that both Becky and Shannon outline. So, also, Michael mentioned about this issue of the bottom 20% and something about a bell curve. At that point, we think there are two mechs now on this side. One, that your personal capacity is below 20%. These are I've given you reasons why those people should still be allowed to make that decision. But secondly, if it is so that it's the bottom 20% of people who take that test, presumably there might be people who are madly in love at the top end who push up the 20% boundary. You might feel you are still in love, but in fact, you value different things in that person. The reason I POI'd Shannon to ask her what values she loves in her boyfriend is because people have a myriad of reasons that they consider why they love someone and consider why they like that person. There are reasons why I like someone that necessarily means I wouldn't want to be in love with them, but perhaps we might make good life partners in the long run compared to someone that I'm madly infatuated with, but quite in fact is very untidy and would annoy me for the rest of my life. There are considerations people take when they choose their life partners that doesn't necessarily mean I have to have that butterfly feeling, which doesn't necessarily mean we're compatible to live with each other, to produce children for the rest of our lives. All these things are taken into account when people choose to get married. The fact the government says this is the value in which we place, these are how you should evaluate your marriage, and it should be based on this concept of love that we are going to define at a test, means that there now is one definition of what marriage should be and what you should value in your marriage. We just don't think that's true. We think each individual has a different idea of what a marriage should be, what a marriage should constitute, and what a life partner should have qualities of. These reasons don't always fall under love. For these reasons, the government should not intervene. I beg you to oppose.
I thank the reply speaker for their remarks, and I call upon the reply speaker of the proposition, Ms. Sharon Tillman, to give the proposition reply in 4 minutes.
So we recognize that there are different criteria that you value in your relationships with other people. But correspondingly, we recognize that there are many different types of relationships you can have with people based on which criteria you share. We think that marriage is just one type of relationship you can have with another person, and we think because of the unique legal risks and responsibilities and privileges involved in marriage, we think love is objectively the appropriate criteria to prioritize in a marriage. We think values like companionship, like friendship, which they talk about on side opposition, can be well served by other types of relationships, which can still give people the hope of finding their true soulmate within a marriage. So I'm going to summarize 3 points in this debate. Firstly, government intervention. Secondly, marriage is a privilege. And thirdly, what produces the best marriages. So on government intervention, we think we're legitimate to involve in this way for a few reasons. We think, firstly, we've argued people can't effectively assess their own love. We think this is clearly demonstrated when Katie gives us the example of puppy love, which in fact is not real love. It's infatuation, it's excitement, it's the very beginning stages of a relationship, which people mistake for being deep, true, passionate love. We think this is the perfect example of why people need a government test to actually inform them of how much love they have for their partner relatively. We think, secondly, your marriage does not just affect you. It is not a lifestyle that you are, or it's not a choice that only affects the individual. It affects your partner. You are having a partner relying on you. You are making someone dependent on you. And we think because you involve another person's life in this way, the government has to make sure that you are competent to take on this risk. We think, even though Becky argues that the government should facilitate all lifestyles, the government clearly does not do so when this lifestyle could be damaging to another person or indeed yourself. So we think the government can intervene in this matter. On a related note, they argue that we are denying people from the privileges and the benefits of marriage if they don't truly love each other. We think, conversely, we're actually protecting these people from the damages and the risks and the harms and the heartbreak of a divorce. We think if people get married and it is unlikely to work, we think the government is actually failing their duty to protect them by ensuring that they are getting into a marriage, which will actually help them achieve kind of the best version of their own life, that can help them do more than they would on their own. We think these vulnerable groups who would not get married under our motion are actually being protected by the government rather than denied these benefits. And we think, furthermore, this motion is clearly taking place in a developed country which provides basic benefits for citizens, because we don't think anyone should be forced into a marriage by pure economic need. So, furthermore, they talk about how the benefits of a marriage are things such as security, stability, and commitment. But we believe that these values are no longer analogous with the concept of marriage because of the fact that so many people get married for the wrong reasons, so many people get married too early and don't really think it through, and so many marriages end in divorce. So we think if marriage is going to have any meaning or any of these values, we think the only way to achieve that is through our proposition. Now finally, we think that the best marriages are achieved when they are based on love. We think this test has a unique benefit of forcing people to consider their relationships before they get married. No one wants to fail this test, so they'll spend time thinking about whether they truly believe they love this person enough to justify marrying them. We think that people are more likely to hold out for their true soulmate under this proposition. We think, furthermore, relationships that are founded on love are more likely to last in the long run. And we think, ultimately, in terms of people feeling like they can't leave marriages, as argued by Becky, we think, firstly, you are still allowed to divorce if your circumstances change to the extent that you no longer want to be married to a person. We think, secondly, these types of marriages that end up being abusive or harmful are far less likely to occur in the first place under our motion, where we assess the true level of dedication you have to your partner. And we think that finally, because this motion makes people think much more realistically, much more frankly about their relationships both before and during them, by demonstrating that love is indeed a continuum and not simply a binary distinction of in love or not in love, we think people are far more likely to be realistic about their relationships and to leave their relationships if it is necessary. So we believe you have better marriages, and we think this is something that everyone in the world has a right to, so we are very proud to propose.
I thank the Prime Minister for her remarks. Thank you for a very engaging debate. I have a round of applause for our debaters on the floor.